The kitchen felt smaller than usual as I sat across from Merritt, my hands trembling around my coffee mug. The fluorescent light above buzzed like an angry wasp, casting harsh shadows across his face. After 3 sleepless nights, I'd finally worked up the courage to tell him everything. "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "about the business trip to Phoenix last month." Merritt didn't look up from his laptop where he was reviewing shipping manifests. His fingers continued typing steadily, the clicking sound echoing in the silence between us. After 9 years of marriage, I knew his habits. He always worked late into the evening, cross-referencing inventory reports with warehouse security logs. "Merritt, please, this is important." He finally raised his eyes to meet mine. Those pale blue eyes that had once looked at me with such love now seemed cold, calculating. "Go ahead, Lyris. I'm listening." I took a shaky breath. The Phoenix trip, it wasn't just business. Ewan was there too. We stayed at the same hotel. Still no reaction, just that steady, unblinking stare. We had dinner together the first night, just colleagues, you know. But then, my voice cracked. Things happened. "I'm so sorry, Merritt. I never meant for it to go that far." The typing stopped. Merritt closed his laptop with deliberate precision and leaned back in his chair. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you'd see on a chess player who'd just realized his opponent had walked into checkmate. "I heard the story weeks ago," he said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. My coffee mug slipped from my numb fingers, shattering against the tile floor. Hot liquid splashed across my legs, but I barely felt it. What do you mean?" Merritt stood up slowly, his movements measured and calm. "I mean exactly what I said, Lyris. I heard about your little adventure in Phoenix weeks ago. Every detail, the hotel bar, the elevator ride to the 7th floor, room 714, the champagne you ordered from room service at 11:30 p.m. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "How could you possibly know all that?" "You'd be surprised what people notice," he said, walking to the kitchen counter and pouring himself a glass of water. "Especially when those people work in logistics. We're trained to track shipments, monitor security footage, cross-reference timestamps. It's what we do." I felt like I was drowning. "Merritt, please, let me explain. I was feeling so alone, and you've been working such long hours, and Ewan was just being kind." "Kind?" Merritt laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call expense account fraud? Because that's what the corporate auditors are going to call it when they review those receipts." The room began to spin. "What receipts?" "The ones where you approved Ewan's inflated vendor invoices. The consulting fees that got deposited into that account you thought I didn't know about. The travel expenses that coincidentally clustered around your business meetings." I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't support me. "I don't understand. How long have you known?" 3 weeks, 2 days, and about 6 hours, Merritt said, glancing at his watch. "Ever since Marcus in shipping sent me the security footage from the terminal gate. You and Ewan getting into the same taxi. Very cozy." My mouth went dry. "You've been watching me?" "I've been documenting you," he corrected. "There's a difference. Every lie you've told me since then, every time you claimed to be working late when you were actually at that diner on 5th Street with him, every deleted calendar entry that still shows up in the sync logs I have access to." The kitchen walls seemed to be closing in. "Why didn't you say anything?" Merritt set down his water glass and looked at me with something that might have been pity. "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go, how many lies you'd stack on top of the first one, and you didn't disappoint." From upstairs, I heard Tamsin's bedroom door creak open. Our 9-year-old daughter had probably been awakened by the sound of the breaking mug. Merritt heard it too and lowered his voice. "You should get some rest," he said, his tone almost conversational. "It's going to be a long week." He walked past me toward the stairs, pausing at the doorway. "Oh, and Lyris, My mother called earlier. She wanted to make sure I was okay. Apparently the whole family's been worried about me. Funny how word gets around. I sat alone in the kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the broken pieces of ceramic scattered across the floor. When I finally made it upstairs, I found an envelope on my pillow. My name was written across it, in Merritt's precise handwriting, along with a note. For your reference, M. Inside were printouts, dozens of them, text messages I thought had been deleted, credit card statements showing charges at the Phoenix Hotel, booking confirmations with timestamps, even a photo of me and Ewan in the hotel lobby, captured by what must have been a security camera. At the bottom of the stack was a business card for a law firm I'd never heard of, with a handwritten appointment time for the following Tuesday. I realized then that while I'd been living in my fantasy, Merritt had been building a case. The next morning at the warehouse felt like walking through a minefield. Every conversation stopped when I approached. Every glance felt loaded with meaning. I'd worked in inventory planning for 6 years, and these people had been my colleagues, some even friends. Now I wondered what they knew and when they'd known it. I found myself gravitating toward the security office, where Jake Morrison usually spent his mornings reviewing overnight footage. Jake had always been friendly, maybe even a little flirtatious. If anyone would tell me what was going on, it would be him. "Morning, Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice light as I knocked on his open door. He looked up from his monitors, and I immediately knew something was different. The easy smile was gone, replaced by professional courtesy. "Morning, Lyris. What can I do for you?" I was wondering, has anyone been asking questions about me lately? Merritt seemed to think there were some concerns about my travel expenses. Jake's expression didn't change, but he swiveled his chair to face me fully. "Concerns? That's one way to put it." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "I mean, your husband came to see me 3 weeks ago, asked me to pull the footage from the terminal gate for the day you left for Phoenix. Said he was doing a routine security audit." The blood drained from my face. "And you gave it to him?" "Of course I gave it to him. He's the shrinkage specialist. It's his job to investigate irregularities." Jake leaned back in his chair. "Imagine my surprise when I saw you and Ewan Kettridge getting very cozy in that taxi. I felt like I was going to be sick." "Jake, it's not what it looked like." "Really?" He turned one of his monitors toward me. The screen showed a frozen image from what was clearly hotel security footage. Me and Ewan at the elevator bank, his hand on the small of my back, both of us laughing at something. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m. "Where did you get this?" "Email attachment, anonymous sender. Came in yesterday morning with a note suggesting I might want to review our vendor relationships with Kettridge's department." I gripped the door frame to steady myself. "Jake, please, you don't understand the whole situation." "I understand enough," he said, turning the monitor back toward himself. "I understand that Ewan's been approving some pretty generous contracts with companies that seem to exist mainly on paper. I understand that those same companies have been paying consulting fees to an LLC registered under your maiden name. And I understand that your travel schedule has been remarkably synchronized with his for the past 8 months. The room was spinning again. "How could you possibly know all that?" Jake gestured to a stack of folders on his desk. "Your husband is very thorough. He's been building quite a comprehensive picture. Bank records, hotel logs, corporate expense reports, vendor contracts. It's actually pretty impressive detective work. I tried a different approach. Jake, we've known each other for years. You know I'm not some kind of criminal. There has to be an explanation for all this." "I'm sure there is," he said, "and I'm sure you'll have plenty of opportunities to share it, starting with the FBI agents who want to interview you next week." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. FBI. Procurement fraud is a federal offense, Lyris, especially when it involves interstate commerce and wire transfers. Once they started digging into Ewan's vendor relationships, your name kept popping up. I stumbled backward out of his office, my mind reeling. Other warehouse workers were starting to arrive for the morning shift, and I could feel their eyes on me. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as I passed. Someone whispered something that sounded like federal investigation. At my desk, I found my computer had been locked out of several systems I normally had access to. When I called IT, they told me the restrictions had been put in place pending a security review. My email was still working, but barely. Most of my contacts in procurement and vendor management were no longer responding to my messages. I tried calling Ewan, but his phone went straight to voicemail. His assistant told me he was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. The assistant's voice was cold, professional. Nothing like the warm familiarity I was used to. By lunch, I was desperate. I drove to the diner on 5th Street where Ewan and I had met so many times before. Maybe he would be there. Maybe we could figure out how to handle this together. He wasn't there, but apparently our meetings hadn't gone unnoticed. The waitress who usually served us, a middle-aged woman named Carol, approached my table with obvious reluctance. "You're Lyris, right? From the warehouse?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but that man you usually come in with, the one in the expensive suits, he was here yesterday with some other people. They were asking questions about how often you two met, whether you seemed like you were conducting business or other things." My appetite disappeared completely. "What kind of people?" "Professional types. One of them showed me a badge, asked if I'd be willing to make a statement about what I'd observed." I left money on the table and fled to my car. As I sat in the parking lot, trying to catch my breath, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "You never know who's watching. Check your email." The attached video file showed me and Ewan at the hotel elevator, but this wasn't security footage. This was taken from someone's phone, someone who had been standing nearby. The angle was perfect, capturing not just our proximity, but the intimate way we were looking at each other. At the bottom of the email was a single line. "How many more do you think exist?" I realized then that Merritt hadn't just been documenting my affair. He'd been orchestrating a comprehensive investigation, using his professional network and skills to build an unassailable case. While I'd been worried about hiding my secret, he'd been 3 steps ahead, gathering evidence I didn't even know existed. The hunter had become the hunted, and I was just beginning to understand how thoroughly I'd been outmaneuvered. The next few days passed in a blur of panic and desperate damage control. I spent hours deleting emails, editing expense reports, and trying to create some kind of plausible explanation for the patterns that were emerging. But every move I made seemed to be anticipated, countered before I even realized I was being blocked. Tuesday morning, I arrived at work to find Ewan's office empty. His assistant, Patricia, was packing files into boxes under the supervision of someone from corporate security. "Where's Ewan?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Patricia looked up with barely concealed hostility. "Mr. Ketteridge has been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of an internal investigation." The words felt like ice water in my veins. "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves federal auditors and forensic accountants," the security guard answered. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from this office. This is now a restricted area." I retreated to my own desk, my hands shaking as I tried to process what was happening. If Ewan was under federal investigation, how long before they came for me? How much did they know about my involvement in the vendor contracts? My computer chimed with a new email. The sender was listed as legal.compliance a corporate, but the message was brief and terrifying. "Ms. Vane, your presence is requested in Conference Room C at 2 p.m. today for an interview regarding procurement irregularities. Please bring any documentation related to vendor approvals from the past 12 months. I spent my lunch break in my car, calling every lawyer I could find in the phone book. Most wouldn't take my call. The few who would listen quoted retainer fees I couldn't afford, especially with my accounts apparently under scrutiny. At 1:45, I walked toward conference room C on unsteady legs. Through the glass walls, I could see 3 people in dark suits sitting around the table. Legal pads, recording equipment, and thick folders were spread across the surface. The interview lasted 2 hours. They asked about every vendor contract I'd approved, every expense report I'd submitted, every business trip I'd taken in the past year. Their questions were precise, detailed, and demonstrated a level of knowledge about my activities that was frankly terrifying. Ms. Vane, can you explain why your approval of Kettridge Industries contracts increased by 340% over the past 8 months? Can you walk us through the business justification for approving the Phoenix conference expenses, given that no other employees from your department attended? Are you familiar with Vane Consulting LLC? According to our records, you're listed as the registered agent. By the time they dismissed me, I was exhausted and more frightened than I'd ever been in my life. As I gathered my things to leave, one of the investigators handed me a business card. Ms. Vane, we strongly recommend you consult with an attorney before our next meeting, and please don't discuss this interview with anyone, especially Mr. Kettridge. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing through all the ways this could get worse. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Merritt's car was already there, along with another vehicle I didn't recognize. Inside, I found Merritt sitting at the kitchen table with a woman in a business suit. She had the same professional demeanor as the investigators I'd just faced, but her badge identified her as a private investigator. "Lyris," Merritt said without looking up from the documents spread between them. "This is Sandra Chen. She's been helping me understand some discrepancies in our financial records." Sandra stood and extended her hand. "Mrs. Vane, I was hoping we could chat about some of your recent business activities." I ignored her outstretched hand. "Merritt, what is this?" "This is me protecting our family's interests," he replied calmly. "It seems there are some questions about how certain business relationships may have impacted our household finances." Sandra opened a folder and pulled out a stack of bank statements. "Mrs. Vane, are you familiar with these deposits? They appear to be payments from various vendor companies to an account registered under your maiden name." The statements showed everything. Every payment, every transfer, every attempt I'd made to hide the money I'd been receiving. But more than that, they showed a pattern of coordination with Ewan's contract approvals that would be impossible to explain as coincidence. "I don't have to answer your questions," I said, my voice barely steady. "You're absolutely right," Sandra agreed. "But the FBI investigators you'll be meeting with next week might be less understanding if you're not cooperative." Merritt finally looked up at me. "Lyris, I want you to understand something. Everything that's happening now, I set in motion 3 weeks ago. The hotel investigation, the vendor audit, the forensic accounting review, even the federal inquiry." I sank into a chair, feeling like the walls were closing in. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" "Because you did it to us," he said simply. "You compromised our marriage, our finances, and our family. You involved our daughter in your lies. You stole from the company that employs both of us. And you thought you were smart enough to get away with it." Sandra was gathering her papers. "Mrs. Vane, I'll be submitting my final report to your husband's attorneys tomorrow. I strongly suggest you find legal representation before then." After she left, Merritt and I sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, he spoke. "The hotel in Phoenix has been very cooperative. They provided keycard logs, showing every time your room was accessed. Interesting how many of those entries occurred when you were supposed to be in meetings." I felt nauseous. "Merritt, please, can't we work this out between us?" "We could have," he said. 3 weeks ago, when you came home from Phoenix, if you had told me the truth then, we might have found a way through this. But you didn't. You lied. And then you kept lying. And while you were lying, I was building a case." He pulled out his phone and showed me a text message thread. "These are from the hotel housekeeper. Turns out she remembers you and Ewan quite well. The champagne orders. the do not disturb signs that stayed up for days, the way you two acted like you were on a honeymoon. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. How did you find her? I hired Sandra to find her. Wasn't difficult. Hotel employees are usually happy to cooperate when they're approached professionally and compensated for their time. He stood up and walked to the kitchen counter, returning with a thick leather portfolio I'd never seen before. This contains everything, Lyris: bank records, hotel logs, witness statements, security footage, expense reports, vendor contracts, email records, phone logs, and about 50 other pieces of evidence that prove what you've been doing. He opened the portfolio to reveal tabs labeled Exhibits A through R. Exhibit A is the security footage from our warehouse showing you and Ewan leaving together. Exhibit B is the hotel registration records. Exhibit C is the first suspicious vendor payment. It goes on from there. I stared at the organized documentation of my betrayal, realizing that while I'd been living day to day, trying to manage my lies and hide my tracks, Merritt had been methodically building a comprehensive case against me. The really impressive part, he continued, is how you thought deleting things from your computer would make them disappear. But everything syncs to the company servers. Everything gets backed up, and I have access to all of it. My phone buzzed. Another unknown number, another message. You should call your lawyer. I looked up at Merritt, who was watching me with that same cold smile. Did you send that? I don't need to send you messages, Lyris. Other people are watching this situation develop. People who have their own interests to protect. As if on cue, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Ewan's name, but when I answered, it was a voice I didn't recognize. Ms. Vane, this is Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We need to schedule a formal interview regarding your involvement in the Kettridge procurement investigation. Can you be available tomorrow morning? I looked at Merritt, who was calmly closing his portfolio of evidence. Tomorrow's going to be interesting, he said. The warehouse roll call the next morning was a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. 53 employees gathered in the main bay for the daily shift briefing, and I could feel every pair of eyes tracking my movement as I tried to blend into the crowd. Jake Morrison was running the meeting, going through the usual announcements about safety protocols and shipping deadlines. I stood near the back, hoping to remain invisible, when I noticed a man in a suit standing by the main entrance. He was holding a clipboard and scanning the crowd like he was looking for someone specific. And finally, Jake was saying, we want to remind everyone that all vendor relationships are subject to ongoing audit and review. If anyone has questions about proper procurement procedures, please see your supervisor. Several people glanced in my direction. The whispers had been growing louder all week. Everyone knew something was happening, but the details were still emerging in fragments and rumors. The man with the clipboard was walking into the crowd now, still scanning faces. He stopped near the front of the group and spoke quietly to Jake, who pointed directly at me. My blood turned to ice. Lyris Vane, the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the warehouse floor. 53 heads turned to look at me. The conversation stopped. Even the machinery seemed to quiet down. Yes? I managed to croak. I'm a process server. I have documents for you. He began walking toward me, and I felt the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Every step he took seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Behind him, I could see people pulling out their phones, some probably recording what was about to happen. Lyris Vane, he said again, now standing directly in front of me. You are hereby served with a petition for divorce, a motion for emergency custody modification, a restraining order regarding marital assets, and a subpoena to appear before a federal grand jury investigating procurement fraud. He handed me a thick stack of papers, each one feeling heavier than the last. You have been properly served, he announced, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Have a good day. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there holding the papers, feeling like I was going to collapse, while 53 of my co-workers stared at me in various stages of shock, curiosity, and what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. Jake cleared his throat. "Okay, everyone, let's get back to work. Break into your teams and check your assignments." But nobody moved. They were all still staring at me, processing what they'd just witnessed. "Federal grand jury," someone whispered. "Procurement fraud," someone else added. "I knew something was going on with her and Kettridge," a third voice chimed in. I tried to speak, to say something that might minimize the damage, but my voice wouldn't work. Instead, I turned and walked toward the exit as quickly as I could without actually running. Behind me, I could hear the conversations exploding back to life. "Did you see her face? Divorce papers at work? That's brutal. My cousin works in procurement. She said they've been investigating some kind of kickback scheme. $50 says she's fired by the end of the week." I made it to my car before the tears started. Sitting in the parking lot, I tried to read through the legal documents, but the words kept blurring together. Divorce petition, asset freeze, emergency custody hearing, federal subpoena. Each document was thorough, detailed, and devastating. The divorce petition included a comprehensive list of marital assets and debts, along with evidence of what it termed financial misconduct and marital waste. The custody motion included statements from witnesses I didn't even know existed, all describing my behavior over the past several months in terms that made me sound like an unfit mother. But the federal subpoena was the most terrifying. It demanded my appearance before a grand jury investigating conspiracy to commit wire fraud, mail fraud, and violations of federal procurement regulations. It listed me not as a witness, but as a subject of the investigation. My phone rang. Unknown number again. "Ms. Vane, this is Agent Rodriguez. I understand you were served with a subpoena this morning. We'd like to meet with you before your grand jury appearance to discuss your options." "What options?" "Cooperation options. It would be in your best interest to consult with an attorney and then contact us to schedule a proffer session." "A what?" "A meeting where you tell us everything you know about the procurement fraud scheme. In exchange, we might be willing to recommend leniency." The call ended, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. Everything was happening so fast, spiraling so far out of control, that I couldn't process it all. I drove to the diner on 5th Street, hoping to find some quiet space to think. But when I walked in, Carol the waitress took one look at me and shook her head. "I can't serve you," she said quietly. "What? Why?" "Because I'm a witness in a federal case now. My lawyer says I can't have any contact with subjects of the investigation." I left the diner and sat in my car, finally understanding the full scope of what Merritt had orchestrated. He hadn't just gathered evidence. He'd created a network of witnesses, a web of legal consequences, and a public spectacle that would ensure I had nowhere to hide. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Lyris, call me immediately. Delia Vane just called and told me some very disturbing things." Then another text from my brother. "What the hell is going on? Mum's in tears." And another from Tamsin's school. "Mrs. Vane, we need to discuss some concerns about Tamsin's emotional state. Can you come in for a conference?" Each message felt like another nail in the coffin of my life. While I'd been focused on hiding my affair, Merritt had been systematically dismantling everything I cared about. But the worst was yet to come. As I sat in the parking lot, trying to figure out my next move, I saw a familiar car pull up. Merritt's brother Dax got out and walked over to my window. "Lyris," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We need to talk." I rolled down my window, hoping for some sign of support from someone in the family. "Dax, thank God. This is all getting out of hand. Merritt's gone crazy with revenge, and I need someone to help me make him see reason." Dax shook his head. "Lyris, I've seen the evidence. All of it. What you did to my brother, to your family, to your daughter. There's no coming back from this." "But Dax..." "No," he said firmly. "I came here to tell you that the whole family knows everything now. Mom, Dad, all the cousins. We've all seen the hotel footage, the bank records, the witness statements, and we're all standing with Merritt. He handed me an envelope. These are character references for the custody hearing. 12 family members, all stating that we believe Tamsin should remain with her father. As he walked back to his car, he turned around one more time. Lyris, you had a good man who loved you, a beautiful daughter who adored you, and a family that welcomed you. And you threw it all away for what? Some money and a few nights in a hotel? I sat alone in the parking lot as the sun began to set, holding a stack of legal documents that represented the complete destruction of my life, and I finally understood that Merritt hadn't just been building a case against me, he'd been building a new life without me. The law office of Brennan, Walsh and Associates occupied the third floor of a glass building downtown. I'd borrowed money from my mother to pay the consultation fee, though I hadn't told her what it was for. The lies were becoming harder to maintain as the circle of people who knew the truth continued to expand. Attorney Emily Walsh was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s who specialized in criminal defense and family law. She'd agreed to see me on short notice, though her expression grew increasingly grim as she reviewed the documents I'd brought. "Mrs. Vane," she said after 20 minutes of reading in silence, "I have to be honest with you. This is one of the most comprehensive cases I've ever seen. Your husband's attorneys have built what appears to be an airtight argument for both the divorce and the custody proceedings." She spread the papers across her desk like she was laying out a hand of cards. Hotel records, bank statements, witness declarations, security footage, corporate audit findings, and now federal criminal charges. Each piece of evidence corroborates the others. I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. But there has to be something we can do. Some way to fight this. Fight what, exactly? The evidence shows you had an affair with a coworker, participated in a procurement fraud scheme, and received kickback payments totaling over $40,000. Which part of that do you want to dispute? The number hit me like a physical blow. I'd never added up all the payments, never thought of them as a single sum. $40,000 sounded like serious money. Federal crime money. "It wasn't supposed to be fraud," I said weakly. "Ewan said the vendor relationships were legitimate business arrangements." Emily looked at me over her reading glasses. "Mrs. Vane, you approved contracts for companies that existed only on paper, received payments coded as consulting fees for services you never provided, and coordinated your travel schedule with Mr. Kettridge to facilitate both the business relationship and the personal one. A federal prosecutor is going to call that conspiracy." My phone rang. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "I should take this," I said. "Lyris?" My mother's voice was strained, barely controlled. "I just got off the phone with that FBI agent. He wanted to ask me questions about your finances, about money you might have given me or asked me to hold." The room started spinning. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth, that you paid for my new roof last month, that you've been unusually generous lately, that you said you'd gotten a promotion and a raise." I closed my eyes, another lie coming back to haunt me. "Mom, I need you to not talk to anyone else about this until I can explain." "Explain what, Lyris? That my daughter is under federal investigation, that my granddaughter is being taken away from her mother, that everything you've told me for the past 6 months has been a lie?" The line went dead. Emily was watching me with professional sympathy. Family relationships are often collateral damage in cases like this. The federal investigation will require them to interview anyone who might have knowledge of your financial activities. "What about Tamsin? What about my daughter?" Emily pulled out another folder. "The emergency custody motion includes a psychological evaluation report. Your daughter has been exhibiting signs of anxiety and stress. Her school counselor documented several instances where she expressed confusion about why Mommy and Daddy have been fighting so much." She handed me a copy of the report. Reading my daughter's words, as reported by the counselor, was like having my heart ripped out. Tamsin told me that Mommy has been crying a lot and taking phone calls in the bathroom, the report stated. She said Daddy seems sad and angry, and she doesn't understand what she did wrong. The court will prioritize stability for the child, Emily continued. Your husband has maintained the family home, has no criminal charges pending, and has the support of extended family. You're facing federal charges, have been terminated from your employment, and your financial situation is unstable. Terminated? I hadn't heard about that yet. According to the documents here, you were fired yesterday for violation of corporate ethics policies. Didn't you get the notice? I thought about the stack of unopened mail sitting on my kitchen counter. I'd been too overwhelmed to deal with most of it. Emily gathered the papers back into organized piles. Mrs. Vane, I need to be very direct with you. The federal prosecutors have offered you a cooperation agreement. If you provide complete testimony about the procurement fraud scheme, they'll recommend a reduced sentence. What kind of sentence are we talking about? Without cooperation, 2 to 5 years in federal prison. With cooperation and full restitution, probably 18 months, with the possibility of home confinement. The number stunned me into silence. There's something else, Emily added. The prosecutors want to interview your daughter. What? No, absolutely not. They believe she may have witnessed conversations between you and Mr. Kettridge, phone calls, meetings at your home. They're trying to establish the timeline and nature of your relationship. I stood up abruptly, knocking over my coffee cup. I won't let them drag my daughter into this. Mrs. Vane, you don't have a choice. This is a federal criminal investigation. They have subpoena power. As I left the law office, my phone was buzzing with messages. Text from the school. Tamsin will be staying with her father tonight per court order. Email from my landlord. Need to discuss rent situation, given recent employment changes. Voicemail from my bank. Please call regarding irregularities in your account activity. Each message represented another piece of my life crumbling away. But the worst was a handwritten note I found on my car windshield. Lyris, the whole warehouse is talking. Everyone knows what you did. Some of us aren't surprised. A former friend. I drove home to find Merritt's car in the driveway, along with a moving truck. Through the living room window, I could see him and Dax packing boxes, while Tamsin sat on the couch with her grandmother Delia. When I walked in, the conversation stopped. What's going on? I asked. We're moving Tamsin's things to my apartment, Merritt said without looking at me. The court granted emergency custody pending the full hearing. Tamsin looked up at me with confused, frightened eyes. Mommy, why can't I stay here with you? I knelt down beside her, trying to keep my voice steady. It's just temporary, sweetheart. Daddy and I are working through some grown-up problems. Delia stood up, her face cold with disapproval. Working through problems? Is that what you call committing federal crimes? Delia, please, not in front of Tamsin. You should have thought about that before you decided to destroy this family. Merritt finally looked at me. Lyris, there's something else you need to know. The federal investigators want to search this house. They have a warrant. As if on cue, there was a knock at the front door. Through the window, I could see several people in FBI jackets standing on my porch. They're here for your computer, your files, any documents related to the vendor payments, Merritt explained. I suggest you cooperate fully. As the agents began their search, I sat on my couch watching my life being systematically dismantled. They took my laptop, my phone, boxes of financial records, and even some of Tamsin's drawings that had been stuck to the refrigerator with magnets from the hotel in Phoenix. When they left 3 hours later, my house felt empty and violated. Merritt was loading the last of Tamsin's belongings into his car. When will I see her again? I asked. That's up to the court, he replied. But Lyris, you need to understand something. This isn't about punishment anymore. This is about protecting our daughter from the consequences of your choices. As they drove away, I stood alone in my driveway, watching the taillights disappear into the darkness. My phone buzzed one more time. a text from an unknown number. Final hearing scheduled for next Friday. Suggest you bring your checkbook. Restitution is going to be expensive. I realized then that Merritt hadn't just been planning my downfall. He'd been planning his family's future without me in it. The courthouse on Friday morning was busier than I'd expected. Families, lawyers, and court officials moved through the hallways with practiced efficiency while I sat on a bench outside courtroom 3, clutching a folder that contained what remained of my legal defense. Emily Walsh had done her best with an impossible case, but even she seemed resigned to the outcome as we reviewed our strategy one final time. "The judge has reviewed all the evidence," she explained quietly. "The federal prosecutors have submitted their findings, your husband's attorneys have presented a comprehensive case, and the child welfare evaluator has made her recommendations." Through the courtroom windows, I could see Merritt sitting at a table with his legal team. Behind him were his mother Delia, his brother Dax, and several other family members I recognized. They looked like a unified front, all dressed professionally, all projecting an image of stability and respectability. On my side of the courtroom, there was just me, Emily, and my mother, who had flown in despite her anger and disappointment. She'd barely spoken to me since arriving, but her presence was something. "All rise," the bailiff announced as Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom. Judge Hendricks was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with a reputation for thorough preparation and no-nonsense proceedings. She'd clearly spent considerable time reviewing the case file, which had grown to impressive proportions over the past month. "We're here today for final hearings in the matter of Vane versus Vane, including dissolution of marriage, child custody, asset division, and related criminal restitution issues," she began. "I've reviewed all submitted evidence, witness statements, financial records, and evaluation reports." She looked directly at me. "Mrs. Vane, before we proceed, I want to confirm that you understand the federal criminal charges against you have been resolved through your cooperation agreement with the prosecutors." "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, my voice barely audible. The cooperation agreement had been a nightmare of detailed confessions, recorded statements, and complete financial disclosure. In exchange for my testimony against Ewan and full restitution of the fraudulent payments, I'd received 18 months of home confinement and 5 years of probation. "Very well, let's address the custody matter first." Judge Hendricks opened a thick folder. "I've reviewed the child welfare evaluation, the psychological assessments, the financial stability reports, and statements from family members, teachers, and other relevant parties." The judge read the evaluator's report. Tamsin was anxious, confused, and suffering under the war between her parents. Then came the line I'd dreaded. Her best interests meant primary residence with her father, the one the court called stable and consistent. My visitation dropped to supervised 2 hours a week, watched and measured. Next, restitution, $43,847 in fraud, plus penalties, $67,500 total. I forfeited the house, savings, and any claim to retirement. Merritt received everything, including the right to relocate. The judge said his documentation was necessary, not vindictive. Outside the courtroom, I apologized. He didn't gloat. "Sorry doesn't fix it," he said,